Welcome to my channel. I'm the Dark Lord of Optics, and what I bring you here is a thinking man's take on guns and optics with occasional forays into politics. Thank you for being here. Alright folks, let's get this show on the road. What you're looking at is the Griffin M8 ACSS Meters reticle. I think that's the full name. I'll type it up so you can see it. Right now the scope is on 8 power. The target we're looking at is 50-ish, 40-ish yards away. I forgot my laser rangefinder, so I don't know for sure. The reticle is currently not illuminated. I am going to take you through the way the reticle looks, and I'll insert a snapshot from Strelog so you'll see what it fits. But I found generally at the altitude where I live, at around 5,500–6,000 foot, the trajectory of the 77 grain 526 ammo matches this reticle quite nicely out to 700–800 yards, or close enough. Essentially dead on at 400 and 500 yards, which is what I'm looking for with BDC reticles. Assuming a 50 yard and 200 yard zero. The scope right now is not on the rifle, so I'm going to be potentially moving it around a little bit here and there, and don't know what it is. I'm not pointing a gun at anyone. It's just a scope on a tripod with a camera behind it so you guys can see the reticle. Let's first rack through the magnifications. We are on 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.5, and 1. I'm just basically going through how the reticle is marked. The target you see on the right, that's just right to the one I'm aiming at. It's a little bit closer, and it's maybe 15 yards closer than the primary one I'm aiming at. Just kind of an idea to give you the depth of field. Depth of field is generally fairly reasonable, and the reticle overall works fairly well. As you can see, when you go to 1 power, there are 4 bars that are sticking out all the way on the side, and there is a fairly large horseshoe in the center. Even when not illuminated, the reticle is nicely visible. There are 10 illumination settings from 1 to 10 with an off level in between each one. So I'm going to switch to 10 right now, and I'm going to cover, and then I'll try to cover the ambient lighting. So this is the illumination. You don't really see it all that much. On a bright sunny day. I specifically went to the range middle of the day for a little bit to do this video so that you guys can see what's happening, and you can hear shots in the background, of course. Illumination remains on. I'm gonna go back up. Magnification 1.5, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, and here you should see that there's a little bit more of the illumination. Right, the camera's auto exposure is getting seriously tricked by the bright ambient light. Let me see if I can get it to meter differently. Okay, while I'm screwing around with the camera, let's see. Okay, there's the exposure spot. Okay, let's try that again. And we are filming again. We are it's not taking no for an answer. It's not that interesting. But anyhow, the way the reticle is designed, you really don't need illumination all that much. I think it would be a better scope if it had a truly bright diffractive reticle. I'll turn illumination off right now. But as it is, it works well. It has enough dynamic range where, unless you're in the brightest sun, you see the reticle, illumination, and all reasonably well. And even without it, you know, the features are large enough and thick enough where it's not hard. It's not hard to aim with it. Now we're back on 1 power. I'm going to point at the power line. It's a little bit further out. So, and then I'll zoom into 8 again so you guys can see what this thing looks like. It's a nice prominent reticle. And the nice thing, they size the tree correctly. I can use the holes, the wind holes, and the wind holes and the drops pretty easily. However, they don't stick out so much that they're distracting. The primary aiming point is the chevron, and there's a circle around it, horseshoe, whatever. And those are the ones that really stand out. Everything else I don't really pay attention to too much when I go fairly fast. And let's repeat this exercise on a target that's a little bit closer. Alright, this one is a little bit closer. We're on 1 power again. I'm going to rack again to 8, and you will see that on this close distance, you'll lose a little bit of depth of focus, but it's not too bad at all. Right, thank you very much. I'm going to show you a picture of this thing, or what this reticle looks like through the collimator. Alright folks, let's look a little bit at the reticle detail. It's an interesting design. This is a meters BDC. I'm gonna do another video for the other version of for the milliradian reticle, for the Griffin mill. There are a few things here that are interesting. One is that these fairly large horseshoe that you see over there, I'm gonna have it circled. So the red, kind of a broken circle you see, is just me trying to highlight a little bit of information for you. The green image is me pointing the scope into the collimator that I have that has a mill scale in it, so I can measure the distances reasonably well. Now you don't have to have a collimator to figure out what the reticle does, because what happens with me usually, you know, BDC type reticles are designed for a particular load, and I never really have that load. So for most things you can figure it out on your own, and for a lot of stuff, on the bottom left, I have this snapshot from Strelok Pro. I don't particularly like Strelok Pro as an application. It works adequately well, but not all that well for me. One of the interesting things with Strelok Pro, as a general warning, one of the reasons I don't use it is that it tends to do something really screwy with weather conditions and gives me wrong ballistic results at longer distances. Now, the only way I found to get it to produce the numbers that resemble reality, because I actually go and shoot these things, the only thing I found that works is to manually give it a density altitude number, and then it accounts for atmospheric conditions adequately well. I'll tell you a little bit of how, if you don't have reticle dimensions, how you can more or less figure out what's what for your application needs using Strelok Pro, something similar. But in the meantime, let's just look at the reticle dimensions. So the large horseshoe, the outer diameter looks to be right around 20 milliradian, which is a very good size for a quick measurement of at fairly close distances. Anything that's inside the circle is basically dead meat. As a primary aiming point, they've got a chevron, which is another good idea. It's fairly easy to do quick aiming with a chevron without it blocking too much stuff. The width of the chevron will correspond to normal shoulder width at a comparatively close distances. And then as you look into the BDC on the left, I have their drawing of it. You see the horizontal hash marks kind of have diminishing widths, and they basically correspond to 18 inches at the marked distance, 4, 5, 6, 7, 800 meters. 18 inches in this case, essentially 50 centimeters. At least that's how I'm reading this reticle. To the left and right of the chevron, there are 3 dots on each side of varying sizes. Looking at the dimensions, they look to be in a more or less 5 milliradian range. For the outer dot, and equidistantly spaced, it's a little bit more than 5. So to me, having run the ballistic calculator, the outer dots look to correspond to 8.6 mile per hour, 8.5 mile per hour approximately lead, at least for the cartridge that I chose to simulate. And that is, so that means that the 2 inner ones are going to be something less. There I go. Yeah, so the first dot is somewhere around 1.6 milliradian. The second dot is at right around, is about 1.5.6. Second one is at about 3.2, and the third one is 3.3, and the third one is right around 5. Okay. All right. So for the 3 lead dots, it looks like the outer, the larger dot is right around 5 milliradian, and the inner ones are at about 1.6 and 3.3, something like that. In practical terms, the outer big dot corresponds to approximately 8.6 mile per hour lead for my cartridge of choice, and within the MPBR distances. The way I view lead, it's always an inexact science. It's very hard to accurately determine how fast something is moving unless you know the speeds in advance. So I assume that I want to get close, and I may have to walk my shots in if I'm shooting something that's moving. So these 3 dots basically give me an opportunity to do that, since they are at what's it called? They are equally spaced, but they are different size. So you can fairly easily see what's what. Okay. Moving right along. Just on the outside of the horse, on the left and the right, there are some quick range finding hash marks where vertically they correspond to roughly a human height. Now, since the reticle is in meters, it looks like they are for 4, 5, 6, 7, and 800 meters, and at those distances you are range finding something that's approximately 1.7 meters tall. Something is about 5'6" or so. If you're using this for yard-based distances, as I'm doing in this case, since I live in the US and the ranges here and yards and stuff like that, if you're using it for yard-based distances, the height of these hash marks is approximately for a 5-foot object. So you can more or less figure out what 5 foot is at the same distances in yards. For the BDC tree, there are 4 wind dots at each BDC distance in 100 meter, 100 yard increments, depending on how you view this. Since we don't know the dimensions right offhand, like I said, I can calculate it. I have other means other than just a snapshot in the column measure to calculate it. But one of the ways you can do this, you can basically play with Strelog Pro and look at, type in different wind values to figure out what matches a particular dot. And for example, for the Mark 262 that I'm shooting out of this gun, I found that the second wind dot corresponds very, very closely to 14.5 miles per hour. Since all the wind dots at each distance are equidistant, meaning they're equally spaced, I know that the closest dot to the center is going to be half of that, and so on. So I can easily figure out what my wind holds, need to be. The way Strelog does this, it automatically gives you wind holds for 2, 5, and 10 mile per hour winds, which does not correspond to any marks in the reticle. It's one of the reasons I find this calculator singularly unhelpful when I actually need to do something. But it generates these drawings for me that I can use for instructional purposes. Further on outside, there are thin lines that go to about 21 milliradian out, and you actually have milliradian marks there, something you can use. And then the lines thicken and go out a little bit further. The way the whole thing looks is fairly reasonable, and the thick bars kind of serve to point your attention toward this large and a very prominent horseshoe in the center. The way the horseshoe is sized, I like quite a lot, because when you're on high magnification, it's large enough where it sort of gets out of the way. But when you're low magnification, it's once again large enough and thick enough where I can easily use it for aiming, whether it's illuminated or not. And even when it is not really correct, and even when I don't, if I'm on low magnification, if I can't easily see the stuff inside the horseshoe, if I'm on 1 power, within the distances where I'm going to be typically shooting at 1 power, anything that's more or less toward the middle of the horseshoe of the circle is more or less a dead meat. Now, if you are paying attention, you will also notice that I've got a on the bottom left, the log printout I have is a little bit different in terms of the BDC holes from the one I showed earlier. The one I showed earlier was for lower altitude. I live a little bit higher up. And this is once again another example how if you mess a little bit with your sight in distance, you can make most BDC reticles work reasonably well for you. What I usually do if I'm planning to shoot at some reasonable distances with this thing, more than maximum point blank range, what I usually do, I try to mess with my sight in distance so that the holes at 400 or 500 yards or thereabouts are reasonably close. Because what happens is that I want, the further out we go, the harder it is for me to know more or less where the distance is. And at those longer distances, a small angular distance results in the largest error. If I'm shooting quickly up close, if I'm a couple inches off, it doesn't matter to me all that much. But the same angular error at 600 yards can actually be comparatively significant. Now, all of this makes sense if you're shooting at a square range where the targets are sitting at some sort of predetermined distances. But I found that mentally it is a little bit easier for me to use a BDC this way. With a couple of different ballistic scenarios that I ran. So where I live, this works well for, this reticle works well for me with a Mark 62 ammo, 77 grain match king at about 2650 foot per second. It works well for me with a 100-yard zero, and then the holes are reasonably close, out to about 700 yards, and I can use it in reasonable comfort. And when at sea level, it works better with a 200-yard zero because the bullet drops a little bit faster, the air is denser down there. The catch is that you really need to spend some time with the ballistic calculator and work it all out. Now, it's not going to be exact, but the purpose behind this is to basically figure out what wind values the wind dots correspond to at what distances, and to basically get you close enough so that you are on paper or on plate, and then if you put in some time and effort and your gun is accurate enough, you can make further variations to the sight. And this is probably one of the comparatively few different things that I do rather differently from a lot of people. I vary my sight in to sort of match the reticle, because I'm assuming for if I have time to slow down, I can compensate for sighting variations. And if I have to shoot quickly, comparatively small differences at closer distances don't matter all that much. All right, I hope all of this stuff makes sense for you guys. And if you have any other questions, you know where to find me. The best way to reach me is darklordofoptics.com, or put a comment under this video and I will answer everything the best I can. Thank you for watching, and thank you for listening.